Today we're making duck with a red wine reduction sauce on top of a bed of rosemary sage mashed potatoes. This is honestly going to be a very fancy meal with every component being jam-packed with flavor. So I'll say this is a must try. Now let's get cooking. First things first, let's make our mashed potatoes. You're going to grab 3 pounds of Yukon Gold potatoes and get to work on peeling them. I would also grab a pot of water as well to put your peeled potatoes in so that way they don't brown while you continue peeling. Once they're all peeled, it's time to dice them up. The smaller you cut them, the faster they'll cook, but go with whatever you're most comfortable with. I did a medium to large dice, trying to keep them the same consistent size. Once they're all diced up, put them in the same pot of water and give them a generous amount of salt. This is how much I did, and I'll be honest, it's probably not that much. From there, we're gonna move that pot on a burner and set to high heat so that it may boil. While we wait for our potatoes to boil, we're gonna work on our flavor liquid, which by the way, I should mention this mashed potato recipe is heavily inspired by Joshua Weissman's recipe. It's pretty much one-to-one, but I'll link his video below as well as his recipe if you want to see it. But back to our flavor liquid, we're going to put 130 grams or 1 stick of unsalted butter in a small saucepan. Let that butter melt fully before throwing in 3 to 4 cloves of garlic. I'm using these frozen minced cubes of garlic, but you could just use regular whole cloves and just lightly crush them with the skin. No need to mince them yourself. After the garlic has lightly toasted in the butter, we're gonna pour in 300 milliliters of whole milk, 78 milliliters of heavy cream, plus a pinch of salt, followed by whisking everything together. Allow the temperature to get back up to heat, and now this is when you're gonna put your herbs in. You can do whatever herbs you want it to taste like, but I did 2 sprigs of rosemary, 3 sprigs of oregano, and about this much thyme. Mix and get all those herbs fully submerged in our liquid, and we're going to steep them on the stove at medium heat for 10 minutes. Make sure the liquid never reaches a boil. While it steeps, we're going to check on our potatoes. Now your cook time will vary depending the size you cut them and how hot your burner is, but an easy way to check for doneness is by grabbing a potato and see if you can poke through it using minimal strength with a fork. You can see here I couldn't get my fork through all the way, so I put it back on the burner for a couple minutes, and a couple minutes later, when I did the same test, this time I was able to poke through all the way, telling me that the potatoes are fully cooked. So I'm gonna take that pot and pour it into my sink over a strainer to catch all my potatoes, and I'll transfer my potatoes back into my main pot, getting ready for our mashing stage. Now you could just throw them in a bowl and mash them regularly with a potato masher, but I'm gonna take an extra step and use a potato ricer to get a smoother consistency without any lumps. I'm going to scoop a few spoons of potato into my ricer and then give the potatoes a squeeze into a large bowl until I've used up all of my potatoes. Again, this is not needed. You could just mash them regularly, but it does help get a smoother consistency without any lumps. Now let's check back on our flavor liquid that's been steeping, and you can see the herbs have gotten slightly darker. And if you taste that liquid, it's jam-packed with buttery, herby flavors. Just be careful not to get too excited to taste it that you forget your spoon is ripping hot. That's hot. Oh my God. Now we're about 90% done with our mashed potatoes. All you have to do is strain all the solids from our liquid using a strainer, and then slowly incorporate that liquid into our potatoes by pouring and mixing together in batches. I did around 3 batches, and by the end you'll have a super smooth, insanely rich flavored mashed potato that's guaranteed to impress anyone in your life. You can also make this a couple days ahead and just heat it up in a pot on the day you're serving it. And now it's time for Donald Duck. First things first, we gotta take the duck breasts out of their packaging and clean off any excess fat and trim any loose bits. I'm using 2 duck breasts here because I thought they were kind of small, but let me know what you guys think. They were $7 a piece. Either way, we're gonna flip it to the skin side and run your knife through it, very lightly scoring it. Try to cut only into the fatty skin layer and not into any of the meat. Make 2 diagonal cuts in opposite direction and you should get something that looks like this. Moving on, we're going to grab a shallot and finely mince it. How I went about it is I chopped off the tip and then split it in half, peeling the outside layers. Now this will be a lot easier if you have a sharp knife, but you're going to want to give your shallots vertical cuts, trying to keep them as close to one another as possible. Once you're done with that, you're going to chop it normally and take your time with it because we want to get tiny minced pieces of shallots. You can also run your knife through the mince a couple times to chop up any big chunks you see. Now you might be crying at this moment, but suck those tears back in your head and move your shallots into a small bowl because now we're going to get to cooking. Grab your duck breast and season both the skin and meat side before placing them into a cold pan. I made a mistake and forgot to season beforehand, so I was only able to season the meat side because I had already turned on the heat and the skin side was stuck to the pan. Either way, season both sides and head on over to your oven, setting it to 350 degrees convectional bake. Now place your pan on medium heat and slowly render that fatty skin. If you're using stainless steel like me, the skin will stick to the pan initially, but it will break off once it's come up to temperature. Now you're gonna wanna slowly render all that fat and make sure you're pressing down on the duck so it has even contact to the pan, or you may find the skin cooked unevenly when you flip it over later on. The more you slowly cook this skin, the better it'll turn out. You'll see here after a few minutes, so much fat will render out that I'm gonna pour it into a little container and save for another cooking project. I actually did this draining step 3 times, but it may differ depending how much fat is in the skin on your duck. After about 10 to 15 minutes of medium heat, I'm gonna flip these duck breasts and you'll see a nice crispy layer has formed on that skin. You can also see how some spots didn't fully brown. I suspect it's because I didn't press the duck into the pan hard enough or long enough. Now pour out whatever excess fat you still have in the pan and move your duck breasts onto a sheet pan on a wire rack and throw them in your oven set to 350 degrees. You're going to leave them in there for about 8 minutes or until you get the proper doneness you're looking for. I'll explain that further later on. But now we're going to get to work on our red wine reduction sauce. And I also want to mention that I got this recipe from this website, and I'll link it down below as well so you can check out. But if you look at our pan, you'll see that we currently have a lot of fond that is built up, which has a ton of flavor that we want to incorporate in our sauce. So first things first, we're going to throw in our minced shallots into the pan and saute them for around 2 to 3 minutes. Once softened, we're going to pour in 1 cup of a red wine. This is a Merlot or Merlot, I don't know how to pronounce it. And make sure with a wooden or rubber spoon, scrape all the fond from the bottom of the pan. You want to get every little bit of it because again, there's a lot of flavor in it. Now we're going to want to put this on high heat and reduce the wine until you have about half as much as what you started with. This is also around the 8-minute mark for me, so I'm going to pull my duck out of the oven and check their internal temperature. As you can see here, my ducks were around 145 degrees, which is actually more than what I was aiming for. I wanted to sit at 135 to 140, but that's okay. While it's resting, it's going to continue cooking and raising in temperature, so it might end up being a low well done. Back to our sauce, we can see the red wine has reduced to about half. From there, we're going to put half a cup's worth of chicken broth, as well as 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar and 2 tablespoons of honey. Give that a solid mixing and throw in a few sprigs of thyme as well. Now we're going to set this back on high heat and further reduce this liquid until we get a nice thick glazy sauce. In the meantime, we're going to go back to our duck breast, and after letting it rest for 10 minutes, we're going to flip the skin side down towards our cutting board and cut very thick pieces of duck. You can see here that it's just below well done with very light pinkness to it. From what I gathered online, medium rare duck is 130 degrees internal and medium is 140 degrees internal, with well done being 155 degrees. And as I said before, I think the duck breast when it was resting slowly rose in temperature and got close to that 155 degrees. All things considered though, it's still going to be very delicious. So let's get back to our pan sauce, and as you can see, it's reduced significantly to the point where it's a nice thick glaze. All that's left to do is throw in 1 tablespoon of butter and mix it pretty vigorously until it's fully incorporated into our pan sauce. Now it is time to plate up our masterpiece. I'm going to throw down a healthy serving of mashed potatoes that I heated up in a small saucepan, followed by 2 servings of duck breast, and don't be afraid to push them into the mashed potatoes potatoes so that way they hold in place. Lastly, we're gonna brush our pan sauce over both of our duck breasts, letting it drizzle and fall into the mashed potato as well, and now you are done. You have a beautiful, quite elegant meal, and even though the duck is cooked more than I would have liked, the flavors of the pan sauce and the mashed potatoes are so strong and delicious that it makes this meal a 10 out of 10 must try. I highly encourage you to give this a shot yourself. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and thank you for sticking around to the end of this video.